Now, fighting has continued on the fifth day of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, despite talks aimed at securing a ceasefire. This morning will be the sixth day of the invasion. Missile strikes killed dozens of civilians in the country's second city, Kharkiv, while air raid sirens sounded again in capital Kyiv. Russia and Ukraine held their first talks on Monday since Moscow invaded Ukraine. The talks lasted about 5 hours and were held in Belarus on the border there. Ukraine has demanded the retreat of all Russian forces from its territory as ceasefire talks began between Kyiv and Moscow on the Belarusian border. The two countries are now planning a second round of talks. Now, Russia on Monday said it was willing to continue talks with Ukraine and that a further meeting would take place in coming days, again on the Polish-Belarusian border between between both sides. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin told his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron that demilitarization of Ukraine and Western recognition of Russian sovereignty over the Crimean Peninsula were prerequisites to end the fighting in Ukraine, is what the Kremlin said of the talk that took place between Macron and Putin. Now, new satellite images from Maxar Technologies has shown a huge Russian military convoy that has reached the outskirts of Kyiv, and that it is even longer than it was previously measured. Maxar said that the convoy is more than 40 miles long. The United Nations, meanwhile, opened a rare emergency special session of the General Assembly on Monday to discuss Russia's invasion of Ukraine by observing a minute of silence for those killed. This is only the 11th time in the UN's history that such a session has been held. Assembly President Abdullah Shahid led all the UN's 193 members in the moment of a meditation before calling for an immediate ceasefire. More than 100 countries expected to speak as the global body decides if it will support a resolution condemning Russia's unprovoked aimed aggression in Ukraine and demanding its immediate withdrawal.
As of today, 352 people, including 16 children, were killed on the Ukrainian side, and 2,040 Ukrainians, including 45 children, wounded during the first 5 days of the Russian invasion. And this number is growing non-stop. The Russian troops are suffering losses: aircrafts, helicopters, tanks, trucks, personnel. The aggressor forces have already lost more than 5,000 in manpower during the first days of aggression. The General Assembly should be vocal in demanding from the Russian Federation to stop its offensive against Ukraine. In recognizing Russian actions as an act of aggression against a sovereign and independent state, in demanding from Russia to immediately, completely and unconditionally withdraw its forces from the territory of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders.
We stand firmly by Ukraine and its people. We deplore the loss of life and human suffering. This is a dire humanitarian catastrophe, and humanitarian needs are rapidly increasing. With the toll of IDPs and refugees rising, humanitarian support is a priority in the wider package of EU support offered to Ukraine in these trying days. The EU and its member states are providing urgently needed humanitarian assistance to the Ukrainian population. The General Assembly has the responsibility to send a strong and united message on the need for Russia to immediately and unconditionally cease its military operations, withdraw its troops, and opt for genuine dialogue. We call on Russia to avoid, in particular, any action that places the safety and security of Ukraine's nuclear and radioactive waste installations at risk.
Peaceful settlement of disputes in accordance with these principles has been India's consistent position that has stood the test of time. As such, my government firmly believes that there is no other choice but to return to the path of diplomacy.
Ukrainian President Zelensky has said he has signed an application for Ukraine to join the European Union. The application comes 5 days after Russia invaded its smaller neighbor, touching off widespread international condemnation and offers of military assistance from the 27-member nation EU and elsewhere. Andril Sibiha, head of Zelensky's office, said on his official Facebook page that the documents are on the way to Brussels. Zelensky was flanked by the Prime Minister, Shimhal, and Chairman of the Parliament as well, Ruslan Stefanchuk. Now, India has said it will help other citizens of other countries as well, and the MEA tweeted, guided by India's motto of the world being one family, Prime Minister Modi stated that India will help people from neighboring countries and developing countries who are stranded in Ukraine and may seek assistance. That's what India told the UNGA. The Ministry of External Affairs also said in a press briefing that amid the Russia-Ukraine crisis, India will provide humanitarian assistance, including medicines, to Ukraine, and that India is guided by the motto of helping and that the world being one family.
There is no other choice.
India is doing whatever it can to undertake immediate and urgent evacuation efforts of Indian nationals who are still stranded in Ukraine. The safety and security of Indian nationals, including a large number of students, remains our top priority. The complex and uncertain situation at the border crossings is adversely impacting the uninterrupted and predictable movement of people. This important humanitarian necessity must be immediately addressed.
Meanwhile, the big concern for India, as mentioned, other Indian students remain stuck in Ukraine. Indian students in Kyiv were advised to reach the nearest railway stations for their onward journey to western parts. On Monday, a second advisory issued by the embassy in Kyiv said that special trains have been arranged by Ukraine for evacuations. But many students on arriving there found no trains arranged for them, and they weren't able to board the trains that had been arranged by Ukrainian authorities. Now, many of the students have been left stranded at the station.
They pushed us all back. We were standing in the front. We were standing at the first, and now they are only allowing Ukrainians to go on our seats.
All Indians are stuck here. I don't know what to do.
And India is giving us advisory to go to railway stations. We tried to change 3 trains, and they are doing it same everywhere. They pushed us all back. We were standing in the front.
Now, Indian students waiting to be evacuated from Ukraine should not panic about flight availability, is what the government said, detailing plans to bring back Indian citizens. But as you can see on the ground, it's very different. A reporter, Jyoti Har, spoke to some of the Indian students.
Really need to go back home. The war situation is getting worse day by day, and it's important for us to go back.
Have you been talking to your family in India?
Yeah.
And how are they feeling?
They are, what can I say, they are tense about us, but at the same time they want us back as soon as possible, and they're hopeful that we'll be back soon safe.
Nobody's helping us board the train. लगा के थक गए हैं. बंद कर रहा है.
They're not letting us. They pushed us away. All the Indian students, they pushed us away. The Ukrainian people. There is no Indian officer helping us out.
It's called the thing they put out. They said the Indian embassy is arranging trains for Indians.
They're not arranging. They're just telling it that this is the window. Just go to the railway station. There's none. There's no train. No resources from the Indian embassy. Zero.
What do they want? These students have gone through more in one day than most people do in their lives. Not only are they in the middle of a war, they just fought one on a train platform and lost. Now they say they don't know where they're going to go or what they're going to do next. All the hope they had this morning is gone.
And the Prime Minister held another emergency high-level meeting on the Ukraine crisis yesterday. That was the third one in 24 hours. Union ministers will be going to Ukraine's neighboring countries to help in the evacuation process.
Assault, snowfall, hurdles Indian trying to flee Ukraine face.
हमें बहुत डर लग रहा है, रात को यहाँ पे बम ब्लास्ट होते रहते हैं, हम लोग रात को सो नहीं पाते सही से।
ये वार का सिचुएशन हमने कभी देखा नहीं है ना कभी हैंडल किया है, तो हमें तो ऑब्वियसली डर लगेगा ही, क्योंकि ये सब हमारे लिए पहली बार है और यहाँ से जब फाइटर प्लेन गुजरेगा तो सबको डर लगेगा ही। आप इंडिया में बैठे हैं, आप ज़रूर सोच रहे होंगे, लेकिन हमें बहुत डर लग रहा है, हमें जल्दी इवैक्यूएशन किया जाए।
Today the Indian Foreign Office appealed to the students to go to Kyiv railway station and make their way west to the borders with Poland, Romania and Hungary, from where the government is organizing flights.
I don't think a student should panic. They should try to go to the western parts of Ukraine, wait there, contact our teams, contact our control rooms, share their location information so that we can get them registered in terms of when can they be brought out, because the borders are very crowded and you cannot just land up and expect to wait. They will wait 2 days or 1 day in the cold.
However, at the station there is chaos. And the reality is different as some students sent videos.
We are students from Kyiv. The embassy told us that we are being evacuated today, and we came all the way to Kyiv railway station and we are being thrown out of the train. They are not even allowing us in. Indian students are being attacked with sticks and stuff. I hope we get this and do something that's really important right now.
Back in Delhi, smiles and relief as 2 more flights landed with harrowing tales.
There was some discrimination also, that they were only allowing first Ukrainians to cross the border, so that's why also we face some problems.
They have to stay at the border in cold for 2 days, then they are allowed to cross.
6 flights from neighboring Romania and Hungary have evacuated over 1,400 students and businessmen. However, thousands still remain stranded, many making journey on foot to reach the nearby borders for hours.
इंडियंस कम से कम 1000 से 12 हैं और 1200 हैं, और टोटल स्टूडेंट्स बंकर्स में अंदाजन 500 से 600 स्टूडेंट्स हैं। देख सकते हैं स्टूडेंट कैसे फंसे हुए हैं यहाँ बंकर्स में, सब सोए हुए हैं यहाँ पे, और यहाँ पे शेलिंग हो रही है। पिछले 72 घंटे में कम से कम 5 से 6 बार शेलिंग हो चुकी है, और आज के दिन में कम से कम 4 से 5 बार शेलिंग हो चुकी है, देख सकते हैं। और फायरिंग भी कंटिन्यूसली चल रही है, बाहर दहशत का माहौल है, बाहर जाने में भी बच्चों को डर लग रहा है, खाने की शॉर्टेज है बहुत ज़्यादा।
Many in eastern part of Ukraine still appeal the Indian government to rescue them. India is sending 4 ministers to assist in the evacuation of Indians stuck at the borders. Hardeep Puri is going to Hungary, Jyotiraditya Scindia to Romania and Moldova, Kiran Rijiju to Slovakia, and VK Singh to Poland.
Ever since the conflict started in Ukraine, about 8,000 Indians have left the country and reached back home. However, there are over 12,000 students that still remain stranded in different parts of Ukraine, especially in the east of the country. And while the government is stepping up the evacuation plans, each and every passing second is crucial to save lives of these people. With camera person Sushil Rathi, I'm Akshay Dongde for NDTV.
And a 7th Operation Ganga flight with 182 Indian nationals stranded in Ukraine arrived in Mumbai today. This was from Bucharest in Romania, and Union Minister Narayan Rane received the Indian students at the Mumbai airport. Remember, the evacuation program is called Operation Ganga, as flights have been bringing back stranded Indian students from countries neighboring Ukraine. So the lucky students who managed to cross the border are the ones who are being brought back by these flights. They're receiving help from the embassies there. However, the struggle remains the crossing of the border, as there's a lot of chaos at Ukraine's border with neighboring countries. Welcome back. Today is the 6th day of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as several cities remain under attack. The Ukraine envoy to India spoke to NDTV. Also, we spoke to a Ukrainian MP who actually pulled out a Kalashnikov on air and said he would defend his country if needed.
Unfortunately, putting missile rocket launchers into residential areas that by definition is not the way to, to make it possible to have fewer civilian casualties. Again, we're talking about tactics that we've normally seen.
So you're accusing the Ukrainian side of having heavy weaponry in residential areas. Is that what you're saying?
We're not accusing anybody of anything. We have pictures of it. Pictures that people from Kharkov...
Let me get Mr. Goncharenko to respond to that. Mr. Goncharenko, the assertion being made is that perhaps there are... Yeah, go ahead.
From Russian media. That's what is it, Sputnik?
She is from the Russian media, that's right. But she makes the point that there is weaponry deployed even by your side in residential areas. Is that correct? Yes or no?
No, it's definitely not correct. But I'm quite shocked with the way of speaking at all. That is our territory, our cities, and your artillery is firing at the cities. We are living people. What you're speaking about, what's staying? I'm here with the Kalashnikov because of you. Just to fight with occupants Russians because you're killing our children and killing us. So maybe because I have Kalashnikov in my hands, you need to put a Grad here, or artillery should kill me because I want to defend myself. Well, I can't understand even the way of thinking, what these people are saying. We have our sovereign country. We have our sovereign territory. Shame on you. You should say that you are ashamed of what your government is doing. Oh, you are ones who is supporting it. So you are a real Nazi to do this. Genocide in the 21st century. Let's go and look at the eyes of children that you killed, of women that sitting in thousands in shelters and metro. And you are sitting and saying something, oh, maybe they put something somewhere. It's a shame. It's a complete shame.
Fighting continued on the fifth day of Russia's invasion of Ukraine despite talks aimed at securing a ceasefire. Today is the sixth day of the invasion. Missile strikes killed dozens of civilians in the country's second city, Kharkiv, while air raid sirens sounded again in capital Kyiv. Russia-Ukraine held their first talks on Monday since Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, and talks lasted about 5 hours. Ukraine has demanded the retreat of all Russian forces from its territory as ceasefire talks took place. The two countries are now planning a second round of talks. And Russia said it was willing to continue talks with Ukraine and that a further meeting would take place in coming days on the Polish-Belarusian border. Negotiators from Ukraine and Russia will return to their capital cities for consultations and have plans for the fresh talks. Both sides announced this after the first meeting took place. Now, Putin also told his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron on the phone that demilitarization of Ukraine and Western recognition of Russian sovereignty over the Crimean Peninsula were prerequisites to ending fighting in Ukraine, according to Kremlin. And a huge Russian military convoy that's being tracked by satellite is now near Kyiv. New satellite images from Maxar Technologies actually show that the Russian military convoy has reached the outskirts of Kyiv and is even longer than it was previously measured. Maxar said that the convoy is more than 40 miles long. The large military convoy consists of armored vehicles, tanks and towed artillery and other logistical vehicles. The United Nations opened a rare emergency special session of the General Assembly on Monday to discuss Russia's invasion of Ukraine by observing a minute of silence for those killed in the conflict. This is only the 11th time in the UN's history that such a session has been held. The Assembly President Abdullah Shahid led all UN's 193 members in the moment of meditation before calling for an immediate ceasefire. More than 100 countries are speaking at the global body as the global body decides if it will support a resolution condemning Russia's unprovoked armed aggression in Ukraine and demanding its immediate withdrawal. Ukraine claims that 352 civilians, including 14 children, have been killed in Russia's offensive.
We were told that they would
As of today, 352 people, including 16 children, were killed on the Ukrainian side, and 2,040 Ukrainians, including 45 children, wounded during the first 5 days of the Russian invasion. And this number is growing non-stop. The Russian troops are suffering losses: aircrafts, helicopters, tanks, trucks, personnel. The aggressor forces have already lost more than 5,000 in manpower during the first days of aggression. The General Assembly should be vocal in demanding from the Russian Federation to stop its offensive against Ukraine. In recognizing Russian actions as an act of aggression against a sovereign and independent state, in demanding from Russia to immediately, completely and unconditionally withdraw its forces from the territory of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders.
We stand firmly by Ukraine and its people. We deplore the loss of life and human suffering. This is a dire humanitarian catastrophe, and humanitarian needs are rapidly increasing. With the toll of IDPs and refugees rising, humanitarian support is a priority in the wider package of EU support offered to Ukraine in these trying days. The EU and its member states are providing urgently needed humanitarian assistance to the Ukrainian population. The General Assembly has the responsibility to send a strong and united message on the need for Russia to immediately and unconditionally cease its military operations, withdraw its troops, and opt for genuine dialogue. We call on Russia to avoid, in particular, any action that places the safety and security of Ukraine's nuclear and radioactive waste installations at risk.
Peaceful settlement of disputes in accordance with these principles has been India's consistent position that has stood the test of time. As such, my government firmly believes that there is no other choice but to return to the path of diplomacy.
Ukrainian President Zelensky said he had signed an application for Ukraine to join the European Union. The application comes 5 days after Russia invaded its smaller neighbor, touching off widespread international condemnation and offers of military assistance from the 27-member nation EU and elsewhere. Andril Sibiha, head of Zelensky's office, said on his official Facebook page that the documents are on the way to Brussels. Now, India has said that it will help others who are stuck in neighbouring countries, and guided by India's motto of the world being one family, Prime Minister Modi stated that India will help people from neighbouring countries and developing countries who are stranded in Ukraine and may seek assistance.
India is doing whatever it can to undertake immediate and urgent evacuation efforts of Indian nationals who are still stranded in Ukraine. The safety and security of Indian nationals, including a large number of students, remains our top priority. The complex and uncertain situation at the border crossings is adversely impacting the uninterrupted and predictable movement of people. This important humanitarian necessity must be immediately addressed.
But the big worry remains Indian students who are stuck in Ukraine, and Indian students in Kyiv were advised to reach the nearest railway stations on Monday for their onward journey to the western parts, as there had been curfew over the weekend in Kyiv. A second advisory was also issued by the embassy in Kyiv that said special trains were arranged by Ukraine for evacuations. But many of the students on arriving and finding their way to the stations found no trains for them. They weren't allowed to board the trains that were there, and many of the students have now been left stranded at the station.
All Indians are still standing here. We were standing at the first, and now they are only allowing Ukrainians to go on our seats.
All Indians are stuck here. I don't know what to do.
And India is giving us advisory to go to railway stations. We tried to change 3 trains, and they are doing it same everywhere. They pushed us all back. We were standing in the front. All Indians are still standing here. We were standing at the first, and now they are only allowing Ukrainians to go on our seats.
All right, so those are students stranded now at the railway station. Now, Europe's toughest sanctions ever have been issued against Russia. So just how will they impact the country? We spoke to the EU envoy to India on our show, No Spin.
Well, in the wake of its invasion of Ukraine, Russia is facing unprecedented sanctions at the moment, sanctions that have been imposed on it by the United States and the European Union, among others. Joining us exclusively on NDTV today is Ambassador Ugo Astuto, the European Union's envoy to India. Ambassador, thank you very much for speaking to us today. May I ask you first, What are, in your view, the impact of the sanctions announced so far actually going to be on the ground? There is, of course, the cutting off Russia's key banks from the central banking system, the SWIFT banking system. Airspace has been closed over the EU for Russian planes, etc. But on the ground, how much do you think that this would work against Russia?
Thank you. Well, this package of sanctions is massive. It is somewhat unprecedented. It's meant to have a severe impact on India, on the economy of Russia, and it is meant to affect severely those responsible for this unprovoked and unjustified attack. You may have heard a third package of sanctions has been approved yesterday night, including 500 million euros in arms, lethal and non-lethal weapons. And let me underscore here, as this is a first, the European Union had never done it. It's a measure which reflects the gravity of the situation, the seriousness of the attack. It's an aggression against Ukraine. It's also a blatant violation of the UN Charter. I think it's important to underscore here that we have an unprovoked and an unjustified aggression from Russia, and it cannot go unanswered.
Ambassador, there are, however, some conflicting views on how much Russia would actually be crippled by these sanctions. Russia says it has billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in forex reserves. At the same time, experts point out that Russia's economy is not in the poor state that it was in when it annexed Crimea all those years ago. Therefore, how would you look at these comments that perhaps Russia might be able to withstand these sanctions at the end of the day?
Well, when it comes to the foreign reserves of the Russian central bank, you will have noted that actually parts of the sanctions which are foreseen are also meant precisely to make it impossible the use of these reserves. I definitely believe that the package of sanctions is such that its effect will not go unnoticed. I think the impact will be severe.
Right. Can I ask you then, Ambassador, as you said, the European Union is in fact now even going to help finance giving weapons to Ukraine, which is unprecedented. What next can we expect in terms of further sanctions against Russia? Is there scope to do more?
Well, you will have seen that these successive packages of sanctions have been following developments on the ground. The severity of the aggression has been matched by the gravity of the sanctions. I think there may be scope for more. It all depends on how the situation evolves. You have also heard about a number of European Union member states closing their airspace to Russian aircrafts. There is something that now the European Union is also willing to further expand to a new wide prohibition.
But can you give us an example of what that could possibly be? What more in terms of sanctions?
No, I think we'll wait and see. What I would like to underscore here is the extreme, how reactive European institutions and European member states have been, how fast the reaction has come. What I can tell you is that if the same level of aggression continues, we will react with equal rapidity and efficiency.
Ambassador, you would have seen that India is sort of walking a fine diplomatic tightrope when it comes to this matter, given its relations with Russia on one hand and now with the United States and other European countries on the other hand. How do you view India's position on this? It has abstained again on the calling of an emergency session of the UN General Assembly.
Well, what I can tell you is that we keep discussing the situation with our friends and partners, with the Indian authorities. We keep them appraised of our assessment and of our perspective. We believe that we are facing a defining moment in the history of Europe. And this is a moment whose consequences may well go beyond the current geographical scope, in the sense that violations of the UN Charter, violations of international law, efforts to disrupt permanently the rules-based system of international governance, well, all these risks setting a precedent which is extremely risky for the whole of the international community. So what we are trying to do is to foster a unified response of the international community, and conversations are now ongoing in New York for a resolution to be tabled at the UN General Assembly.
So given what you've just said, do you think that India needs to be more categorical in its condemnation of the Russian invasion? Do you think India would have to take a firmer stand?
No, I will simply repeat what I said earlier. I think it's important that the international community assesses the situation for its actual gravity. We clearly see a violation of the UN Charter. And the UN Secretary General said so a couple of days ago.
But do you think, as the world's largest democracy, that a special responsibility falls on India to take a position?
Again, I would say that the rules-based system of international governance is a global common good, and we all need to work together to preserve it.
Well, Ambassador, that is why you are a good diplomat. Thank you very much for joining us on NDTV today. Thank you very much.
Welcome back. Election news now in Manipur as the state voted in the first phase of the two-phase polls for 60-member assembly. 38 seats went to the polls yesterday. The fate of 173 candidates, including Chief Minister Biren Singh and his deputy Joy Kumar Singh, has been locked in the EVMs.
Manipur's first BJP Chief Minister Biren Singh voting in the first of the insurgency-hit state's two-phase election in capital Imphal, as the BJP tried to retain a state long dominated by the Congress, till Mr. Singh switched over 6 years ago.
I found and I got positive response from my AC also. I'm expecting full majority and I'll get 75%.
But hours ahead of the vote, a fresh headache for the Congress, as the party was forced to expel a candidate for allegedly helping issuing an appeal in favor of the BJP.
Party the karimate information to the namana media da karigumba khara aikogi party aduda sagot kane kan torpaduna maram oira kan aikogi party ki sana pathap ki manung ina ngarang da maru oina aikogi ma party ki tanthokre.
The polls in Manipur were held under tight security, but some violence, allegedly booth capturing and destruction of EVMs, was reported from areas dominated by the Kuki tribe and in the Imphal Valley. There were no casualties. In Manipur this time it has been a multi-corner poll battle, and barring the Congress, no other political party has a pre-poll alliance. And for the BJP, which wants to win Manipur with absolute majority, might find more than the Congress its own allies like the NPP or the JDU to be a bigger hurdle. And these parties claim that this time as well in Manipur there might be a fractured mandate.
It's going to be a fractured mandate. I think no party can. Our party will be the single largest, and as of today we will be very close to 30.
We will be the key party in forming the government. We will be winning more than 10 seats. No one will be crossing 20 seats.
Voters, especially the youth, said price rise and jobs were big issues.
I'm not really satisfied with the manifesto of all the parties actually.
मुझे वो इतनी महंगाई बढ़ गई है, वो कम करने वाली सरकारी, जो दूसरों को गरीबों को मिटाने वाली, वो मदद करने वाली, वो वाली सरकार हमको चाहिए.
The second and final phase of voting is on 5th of March. And the big question is, will Manipur throw up the trend of a fractured mandate, or will things be different this time? With BM Sanju, in Imphal, Ratndeep Chaudhary for NDTV.
And today is the last day of campaigning for the next phase of elections in UP. In 2017, the BJP had won 8 out of 9 assembly constituencies in Gorakhpur. The then MP Yogi Adityanath became the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh. So in 2022, is he the biggest trump card for the party in this district? We try and find out what voters of Gorakhpur want this election.
तो गोरखपुर के दिल में क्या है, आइए पता करने की कोशिश करते हैं। गृह जनपद है, गृह जिला है, मुख्यमंत्री योगी आदित्यनाथ का गोरखपीठ जो है उसके वो मठाधीश भी हैं। लेकिन इस बुल बनाम बुलडोजर की लड़ाई में, जिसमें उनको एक उपाधि मिली है बुलडोजर वाले बाबा, तो बुलडोजर वाले बाबा क्या अपने विपक्षियों पर भी बुलडोजर चला देंगे, या विपक्ष के लोग जिस तरीके से वो आगे बढ़ रहे हैं उसके रास्ते में बुल रख देंगे, यानी कि सांड की जो लड़ाई हो रही है। गोरखपुर के दिल में क्या है, ये जानने की कोशिश करते हैं। आप लोगों का बहुत बहुत स्वागत। मैं आपसे जानना चाहता हूं कि आपने 5 साल का यहाँ पर कार्यकाल देखा। योगी आदित्यनाथ यहीं के हैं और अब मुख्यमंत्री हैं, दोबारा मुख्यमंत्री बनने का सपना भी देख रहे हैं, दावा भी पेश कर रहे हैं। आप किस तरीके से देख रहे हैं?
हम लोग इस शहर में योगी जी को सिर्फ और सिर्फ महंत योगी आदित्यनाथ के रूप में जानते हैं। योगी जी आज बुलडोजर चला रहे हैं, इसके पहले भी योगी जी बुलडोजर चलाते थे।
कैसे? इस
शहर में रहना है तो योगी योगी कहना इस शहर का नारा हुआ करता था।
नौकरी है आपके पास?
नहीं, अभी नहीं। हम उस लायक ही नहीं है कि हमको नौकरी कहाँ से मिले।
अच्छा, लायक नहीं मतलब पढ़ाई कर रहे हैं?
पढ़ाई कर रहे हैं।
लेकिन उम्मीद आपको योगी आदित्यनाथ
जरूर मिलेगी। हम उस लायक होंगे तो हमको नौकरी मिलेगी।
नहीं, ऐसा कुछ नहीं कहा जा सकता कि निष्पक्षता के आधार पर कह रहे हैं कि निष्पक्षों की अगर बात की जाए तो ऐसा नहीं हुआ है। और
मतलब कैसा नहीं हुआ है?
देख करके कार्रवाइयाँ हुई हैं।
अच्छा, देख करके सरकार ने कार्रवाई की। इससे क्या तात्पर्य? आप बहुत सहम के अपनी बात रख रहे हैं, एकदम कदम फूंक के। क्या हुआ?
इसलिए कि बात जो सही है वो कदम फूंक करके ही रखनी पड़ती है।
अच्छा, क्यों?
अब सरकार है और सरकार में सब कुछ संभव। यहाँ तो आप जानते ही हैं,
बुलडोजर चल जाता है।
और रही बात कि पहली बार ऐसा प्रदेश में हुआ कि लोग डर के बात कर रहे हैं। पहले खुल के बात लोग करते थे, इसके पहले भी सरकारें रहती थी, और अब तो केवल फोटो डाल देने से आपको जेल हो जाएगी, घर से उठा लिए जाएंगे।
ऐसा नहीं। और उत्तर प्रदेश के मुख्यमंत्री, यशस्वी मुख्यमंत्री पूज्य महाराज जी की वजह से 25 साल में जो गोरखपुर की एक अलग पहचान बनी, वो आज तक गोरखपुर की पहचान नहीं बन पाई। इसके पहले सपा बसपा कांग्रेस की भी सरकार थी। आज हिंदुत्व और हिंदू का मुद्दा सिर्फ उत्तर प्रदेश में रह गया, और फिर से उत्तर प्रदेश में पूज्य महाराज जी पूर्ण बहुमत से उत्तर प्रदेश से मुख्यमंत्री बनने जा रहे हैं।
लेकिन जो बात कह रहे हैं उसका आप जवाब दे रहे हैं।
हमेशा में रहते तो आप चौराहे पे खुले घूमते नहीं मेरे बड़े भैया। ये तो आपकी
यहाँ जो
हो सकती है।
ये पूर्वांचल का गोरखपुर शहर है। यहाँ बहुत से राजनीतिक पृष्ठभूमि के बड़े ऊर्जावान लोग रहते हैं और राजनीति करते हैं। उनकी नर्सरी को खत्म कर दिया गया, उनकी प्रतिभा को मार दिया गया।
अपराधियों की नर्सरी को खत्म कर दिया गया।
अपराधी सब जनता को इरिटेट कर रहा है।
अच्छा, मुझे एक बात बताइए, ये हम लोग जहाँ गए हैं वहाँ पर हमने देखा एक बेरोजगारी एक चुनावी मुद्दा बना है, सांड एक बेरोजगारी मुद्दा, एक चुनावी मुद्दा बना है।
गोरखपुर शहर में आए हैं, बता दीजिए कितने सांड आपसे मिल गए? आप बताइए, ईमानदारी बताइएगा।
शहर में दिक्कत नहीं है ना महाराज, दिक्कत
बयान करता हूँ मेरे भैया।
बिहार के आगे चले जाइए, वहाँ देख लीजिए कितनी सारी गायें बैठी हुई है। गोलघर की सड़कों पर चलना मुश्किल है, इतनी गायें हैं यहाँ, और आवारा पशुओं से पूरा जिला परेशान।
अच्छा, इससे पहले मैं आपके पास आऊँ, सलीम भाई हमारे साथ यहाँ आता हूँ एक सेकंड। सलीम भाई, यहाँ पर हम देख रहे हैं सब अपनी अपनी बात रख रहे हैं। सबका ये कहना है कि यहाँ पर भारतीय जनता पार्टी के जो लोग समर्थक हैं या योगी आदित्यनाथ के जो समर्थक हैं, उनका कहना है कि ऐसा बम्पर विकास जो है वो पहले कभी नहीं हुआ है गोरखपुर। आप यहाँ
बारिश में नाव चलती, इसी नाव चलती। आप जाइए ना।
एक सलीम भाई से पूछ लो, उसके बाद आता हूँ। हाँ, आपका विश्लेषण।
देखिए, ऐसा है कि 17 की लहर तो नहीं है। अगर
17 की लहर गोरखपुर में नहीं
है। अगर गोरखपुर में 9 सीटें थी, जिसमें से 1 सीट चिल्लू पार की बसपा ले गई थी, बाकी 8 सीटें जो हैं वो बीजेपी के खाते में गई थी। लेकिन इस चुनाव में ये देखा जा रहा है कि एक सीट छोड़ के, गोरखपुर सदर की सीट छोड़ के बाकी 8 सीटों पे सीधी टक्कर है। अब
किसके साथ
रिजल्ट क्या होगा?
अगर देखिए, अगर विकास का पैमाना बिजली, सड़क, पानी, सुरक्षा, लॉ एंड ऑर्डर है तो योगी जी 100 में 110% सफल। विकास सिर्फ सरकारी नौकरियों से आता है तो योगी
विकास बुलडोजर से भी आ रहा है क्या?
अरे सर, बुलडोजर तो बदमाशों के ऊपर चला है ना, ये विकास ही है। आज ये विकास ही दिखाई दे रहा है।
ये बुलडोजर वाला विकास क्या है?
बुलडोजर सिर्फ एक धर्म विशेष के लोगों पर और जाति विशेष के लोगों पर,
धर्म और जाति विशेष के
लोगों पर बुलडोजर चलता है। बुलडोजर कहाँ चला?
चलिए, आप सब लोगों का बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद हमारे साथ जुड़ने के लिए। तो माहौल अब गर्म हो गया है और बातचीत लगातार चल रही है। अब देखना ये होगा कि गोरखपुर में ये जो बाबा का बुलडोजर जिससे वो जाने जाते हैं, ये बुलडोजर क्या प्रतिद्वंदियों को रौंदते हुए राजनीतिक रूप से आगे निकलेगा या इस बुलडोजर में डीजल खत्म हो जाएगा और वो रुक जाएगा? ये चीज 10 मार्च को पता लगेगी।
Hello and welcome. You're watching Good Morning India. I'm Gargi Raut. Let's get you the latest on the Ukraine crisis. And fighting continued on the 5th day of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Despite talks aimed at securing a ceasefire, this morning would be the 6th day of the invasion. Missile strikes killed dozens of civilians in the country's second city, Kharkiv, while air raid sirens sounded again in capital Kyiv. Russia, Ukraine held their first talks on Monday since Moscow invaded Ukraine. These talks lasted about 5 hours. Ukraine demanded the retreat of all Russian forces from its territory as ceasefire talks took place on the Belarusian border. The two countries are now planning a second round of talks. And Russia said it was willing to continue talks with Ukraine and that a further meeting would take place in coming days on the Polish-Belarusian border. Right now, representatives who held those talks have returned to the capital to hold consultations. And Russian President Putin told his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron on the phone that demilitarization of Ukraine and Western recognition of Russian sovereignty over the Crimean Peninsula were prerequisites to ending the fighting in Ukraine, according to the Kremlin. Now, the United Nations opened up a rare emergency special session to discuss Russia's invasion of Ukraine by observing a minute of silence for those killed. This is the only 11th time in UN's history that such a session has been held. Assembly President Abdullah Shahid led all of UN's 193 members in the moment of meditation before calling for an immediate ceasefire. More than 100 countries were expected to speak as the global body decides if it will support a resolution condemning Russia's unprovoked armed aggression in Ukraine and demanding its immediate withdrawal. Ukraine said 352 people have been killed so far.
As of today, 352 people, including 16 children, were killed on the Ukrainian side and 2,040 Ukrainians, including 45 children, wounded during the first 5 days of the Russian invasion. And this number is growing non-stop. The Russian troops are suffering losses: aircrafts, helicopters, tanks, trucks, personnel. The aggressive forces have already lost more than 5,000 in manpower during the first days of aggression. The General Assembly should be vocal in demanding from the Russian Federation to stop its offensive against Ukraine. In recognizing Russian actions as an act of aggression against a sovereign and independent state, in demanding from Russia to immediately, completely and unconditionally withdraw its forces from the territory of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders.
We stand firmly by Ukraine and its people. We deplore the loss of life and human suffering. This is a dire humanitarian catastrophe, and humanitarian needs are rapidly increasing. With the toll of IDPs and refugees rising, humanitarian support is a priority in the wider package of EU support offered to Ukraine in these trying days. The EU and its member states are providing urgently needed humanitarian assistance to the Ukrainian population. The General Assembly has the responsibility to send a strong and united message on the need for Russia to immediately and unconditionally cease its military operations, withdraw its troops, and opt for genuine dialogue. We call on Russia to avoid, in particular, any action that places the safety and security of Ukraine's nuclear and radioactive waste installations at risk.
Peaceful settlement of disputes in accordance with these principles has been India's consistent position that has stood the test of time. As such, my government firmly believes that there is no other choice but to return to the path of diplomacy.
Although Russian strikes are reportedly largely targeting Ukrainian military facilities, we have credible accounts of residential buildings, critical civilian infrastructure, and other non-military targets sustaining heavy damage. This escalating violence, which is resulting in civilian deaths, including children, is totally unacceptable. Enough is enough.
Ukrainian President Zelensky said he'd sign an application for Ukraine to join the European Union. The application comes 5 days after Russia invaded its smaller neighbor, touching off widespread international condemnation and offers of military assistance from the 27-member nation EU and elsewhere. The head of Zelensky's office said on his official Facebook page that the documents are on their way to Brussels. But this even as new satellite images from Maxar technology show a Russian military convoy that was making its way to the capital has reached the outskirts of Kyiv and is even longer than it previously was measured. Maxar said late on Monday the convoy is more than 40 miles long. The large military convoy consists of armored vehicles, tanks, towed artillery and other logistical vehicles and is now approaching Kyiv. And the Ministry of External Affairs said in a press briefing that amid the Russia-Ukraine crisis, India will provide humanitarian assistance, including medicines, to Ukraine. That India, guided by the motto of the world being one family, India will help people from neighboring countries and developing countries who are stranded in Ukraine and may seek assistance.
India is doing whatever it can to undertake immediate and urgent evacuation efforts of Indian nationals who are still stranded in Ukraine. The safety and security of Indian nationals, including a large number of students, remains our top priority. The complex and uncertain situation at the border crossings is adversely impacting the uninterrupted and predictable movement of people. This important humanitarian necessity must be immediately addressed. And the priority is Indians and Indian students who are stuck in Ukraine. Now, students in capital Kyiv were advised to reach the nearest railway station once curfew had lifted on Monday for onward journey to western parts. A second advisory was also issued by the embassy in Kyiv saying that special trains had been arranged by Ukraine for evacuations. But many students on arriving there found no special trains arranged. There were trains, but they weren't able to board these trains that were there. They weren't being allowed to get onto these trains, and many of the students have now been left stranded at the stations.
All Indians are still standing here. We were standing at the first and now they are only allowing Ukrainians to go on our seats.
All Indians are stuck here. I don't know what to do.
And India is giving us advisory to go to railway stations. We tried to change 3 trains and they are doing it same everywhere. They pushed us all back. We were standing in the front.
This is Shreya and I was stuck in Kyiv,
All Indians are still standing.
Ukraine. Today morning we received an advisory from the embassy saying that we should reach the nearest railway station, which we did. We reached here at around 11 in the morning. When we reached here, we found out that there was no arrangements made by the embassy whatsoever for Indians. There was no special trains, no Indian officials, none were seen. Their phone numbers, when we tried calling them, they didn't receive their calls. Then when we did find trains, we were kicked out. We weren't allowed to board the trains only due to the fact that we were Indians. We are stuck here. We are at the railway station right now, as you can see. There is the curfew started. We've heard news that the bombings have also started here in Kyiv. And we are waiting in the waiting room without food. I've eaten nothing from morning, I swear to God. So this is a request for the embassy. Thank you.
All right, so a very difficult situation being faced by so many students who are waiting to be evacuated. Now, the government has said that the students should not panic about flight availability and has detailed their plans to bring back Indian citizens. But as you can see on the ground, it's really very different managing in the circumstances. Journalist Jyoti Hire spoke to some of the Indian students there.
Really need to go back home. The war situation is getting worse day by day, and it's important for us to go back.
Have you been talking to your family in India?
Yeah.
How are they feeling?
They are, what can I say, they are tensed about us, but at the same time they want us back as soon as possible, and they're hopeful that we'll be back soon safe.
Nobody's helping us board the train. लगा के थक गए हैं, बंद कर रहा है।
They're not letting us. They pushed us away. All the Indian students, they pushed us away. The Ukrainian people. There is no Indian officer helping us out.
It's called the thing they put out. They said the Indian embassy is arranging trains for Indians.
They're not arranging. They're just telling it that this is the window. Just go to the railway station. There's none. There's no train. No resources from the Indian embassy. Zero.
What do they want?
These students have gone through more in one day than most people do in their lives. Not only are they in the middle of a war, they just fought one on a train platform and lost. Now they say they don't know where they're going to go or what they're going to do next. All the hope they had this morning is gone.
All right, so that is the situation for many students who are stranded in Ukraine. Some are on the borders as well. We're now joined on the phone line by Anubhav Arya, who's a third-year medical student there in Ukraine. And we're also joined by Suresh Goyal, a former diplomat. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Anubhav, first, if you could tell us where you are. Okay, we will try and speak to Anubhav. But Suresh Goyal, if you know, now the ministers are going to be going to these neighboring countries with Ukraine to help in this entire evacuation effort. If you could, you know, explain to us what exactly can we expect from the ministers once they arrive there?
Well, the ministers have been chosen because of their contacts, the personal network with the high-level contacts, and I'm sure that their visit to these countries will be able to facilitate even more greatly, the evacuation in terms of arranging flights, in terms of providing accommodation, etc., etc. So the ministers will be very, very useful, their visit, in arranging things in the countries from where the evacuation will take place, like Romania, Hungary, Poland, etc., Slovakia, etc. However, I must mention the problem is not really there in the countries from where the evacuation takes place, yes, but the country in Europe, Ukraine. That is where the problems are. Yes.
And is anything possible there? Because we've been speaking to students, you know, who've even spent 2 days at the border with Poland, with Romania, and they say there's just so much chaos there. They also claim that, you know, they're being discriminated against, that they're being beaten. Now, I don't know if that's happening with all the people who are gathering there. They're saying, of course, the Ukrainians are being allowed to pass through more easily. In this situation, what can be done? You know, can officials actually cross the border and try and help? They say there are various checkpoints, so perhaps we need to make more of a push at these border spots to send Indian representatives across to help in this entire, you know, smoothing the process for the Indians to cross the border.
Well, we have mixed reports from what I've seen. There are some students who have landed and they're quite happy and they were quite satisfied with the facilities provided by the embassy. The problem is that in a country which is at war, like in Ukraine, they may promise they may give assurances of certain facilities. But actually, when it comes to the ground realities, it turns out to be entirely different. And for Ukraine, obviously, the priority will be Ukrainians, even if they promise certain facilities to the Indian students. So I think our embassy in Ukraine will need to make more efforts in terms of coordination with the Ukrainian government. Prime Minister has already spoken to Zelensky on this issue also. Beyond, I think the effort is to really have effective coordination, ensure that the Ukrainian government provides facilities at the border posts for the Indian students to cross into the other countries, arrange the trains. I think the train thing that I heard about, it was clearly a case of Ukrainian promising certain things to the embassy and then not delivering on that on the ground.
Right, because again, the same thing that we've seen has happened in Kyiv is that the students were actually asked to get to the railway stations, that special trains would be arranged, and we carried those. It was tweeted out as well. There's a new handle that's been created, Operation Ganga, especially for the students who are stranded in Ukraine. But when they got to the railway stations, at least the students that we've spoken to and have videos from have said that there was nobody there to help them, and the Ukrainians, of course, were not letting them onto the trains. They're claiming that they saw train after train leave, and they just weren't able to get onto the trains, and now many of them find themselves stranded at the stations. And as we know, now morning is upon Kyiv, and there's sound of shelling and explosions taking place.
Absolutely. You see, just like in the other countries in Ukraine, also for all the facilities, the embassy will need to depend greatly on the Ukrainian government. For example, the access to the trains. Unless the Ukrainian government abides by the commitments and the assurances it gives, the embassy is actually quite helpless. They can't run the train themselves. Therefore, it's a situation on ground in Ukraine because of the war, which creates all the difficulties at the embassy. I think I'm personally convinced that embassy will need to make greater effort with the Ukraine government in terms of getting these students out. The problem is not in the countries like Romania, Poland, but in Ukraine.
All right, we're also joined by Brigadier BK Khanna, security expert and war veteran. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Your comments on, the anguish we're seeing, because you can imagine many families in India just very anxious about their loved ones in Ukraine, and the situation on the ground there with many of our students, at the borders are facing, they're claiming they're being discriminated against. We can understand it's a war. There's a lot of chaos there. But what more can be done? Now, ministers are going to go to the neighboring countries to see what they can do to facilitate this evacuation of Indians.
In fact, wherever the war is on, there is what we call it a fog of war. There is a little bit of a confusion which is taking place, and that is where, of course, we call it a crisis, and how we can, in fact, deal with both particular crises. This is the situation as of now, and I am very sure with these our own ministers going there, so they will be able to coordinate with those respective the countries. And the main problem which is going to come up, which I can foresee, is that the Ukrainian, the guard, the Ukrainian people, they are in fact saying that India has not helped us. That is where we have been voting. In fact, we have rather not voted. We have abstained in the UN. And even in the UNGA also, we have in fact abstained here. So that is a little bit of a, in fact, challenge, you can take it. And how they manage it, that is where, of course, the diplomacy comes up. The Ukraine, our own embassy in Ukraine has got a lot to do. And of course, some of those resourceful persons out there only. So there is a need to talk to the Ukraine people, also the government, as also the others, so that some word is given to them. Besides, of course, this neighboring government. So this will be facilitating our people coming out there only. But hopefully, I think in case the talks, in fact, they continue. So we all hope that it finishes a little early, but it doesn't look like. But it's likely to be a little longer war.
Right. And finally, Ambassador Goel, just want to ask you one more point, that some of the students, and this is anecdotal again, this is what students are saying, they're claiming that they're being discriminated against because of India not, voting at the UN and abstaining from the vote. Again, this is something that students claim that is happening, and we can't say for certain, but when one can understand that, maybe the government in Ukraine really doesn't have control over its people on the ground, its policemen, its guards there at the borders.
Well, as you said, this is purely anecdotal, really, and there can be no confirmation of this attitude of the Ukrainian government. One can't rule it out. One can't really confirm it. All one can say is that President Zelensky, in his conversation with Prime Minister Modi, had assured him of all cooperation from the Ukrainian government, which is not being reflected on the ground. So that is where we are in terms of the real situation. But my own personal belief is that it's nothing to do with the vote. It is simply the chaos which happened on ground in such a situation, and the Ukrainians will get the priority.
All right. Well, thank you both for joining us on the program, and that remains the big worry for India, and the priority is to get our citizens out from Ukraine as it's invaded by Russia. Today is the 6th day of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Well, we'll slip into a short break and get you more news and developments on the other side. Stay with us. Well, we're now joined by Ashwini Kumar Dinkar, one of the lucky students who managed to come back from Ukraine. Ashwini, if you could tell us, where you are and tell us about your journey back. How were you evacuated?
Right now, I'm in Saharsa, Bihar, and I started my journey on 26th of February. We, along with my friends, booked one taxi. We were promised that next day our university will arrange some buses for students to cross the border. But we thought as university is going to carry approximately 1,000 and 1,200 students, so there will be a lots of crowd over there. So we pre-planned that we will go before the university, and we went by our own taxi. And when we reached there, there were already thousands of local Ukrainians and other foreign students.
What was this, if you could tell us?
I was studying in Ivano-Frankivsk National Medical University, which share border equally with all the countries, but we went to the Romania border.
Okay.
And on Romania border, there were little less crowd than as compared to the other border at the time when I reached, but start getting crowded over the time. In morning, there were already 500, 600 Indian students over there, and like 1,000 plus Ukrainian women were over there. So the crowd was too much, and they were prioritizing the Ukrainian women, pregnant women and old women and women with children before any foreigner. And they were asking us to coordinate with the time, have patience, and they will allow us to go. I waited approximately 13 hours over there. Temperature in Ukraine was obviously very low. It was 0 degree, -2 degree, something like that. And when they allowed us to cross, again in the procedures, they were prioritizing the Ukrainian citizen before us. They were all the procedures were given first to them, then it was given to the foreign students or any foreign citizen.
Okay, but you managed to wait it out and cross over there?
Yes, we have to be patient over there, because we know everybody is in war situation. Everybody has to leave the country. Everybody is in same situation as I was. The problem was same for everyone, no matter we are from wherever we are. So we have to wait, and I acted according to the instructions. Indian officials were obviously there. They were asking us to keep patience. We will take you out.
Oh, so that's good to know. So Indian officials, you were in contact with them. Where were they exactly? Were you speaking to them on the phone? Were they at one of the posts to facilitate your crossing over?
On phone too, we were in contact with Romania embassy, and there were officers from Delhi who were constantly walking around the border areas, and they were in contact with us, verbal contact, face to face, like, have patience, we are here for you, we will take you out, don't worry, don't be panic, we are talking with the government, we will arrange everything, like that.
All right, so that's really good to know, because now, a lot of complaints, and one can imagine perhaps the situation has changed, since then, and there are more crowds there at the border areas, because some students are talking about, being beaten. We've seen visuals of, guards even kicking students who are waiting, and so there have been lots of terrible accounts also coming in of the way they've been manhandled at the border.
Actually, when I was there, it was not that much crowded as compared to now. So when lots of Indian students get accumulated over there, it leads to create lots of pressure on the guards, and no army welcome you with folded hands. So those are already the Ukrainian armies over the border. So they were asking everyone to coordinate with the time, with the patience, and the orders given by our embassy. And obviously, we all the students were very impatient because of the crowd and because of the time, temperature, everything. Nothing was
favorable. One can imagine it must have been such a stressful situation. Finally, Ashwini, just briefly, if you could tell us, because a lot of people have asked, since it was known that there was this tension with Russia, there was this fear of violence breaking out. Many have questioned why students didn't, on the 15th when the advisory was issued, why didn't they leave at that time?
Actually, ma'am, our universities were not running online, and my university has 100% attendance. We can't leave the class, and we cannot move out without making it online or closing the university, making classes off. So we were waiting for our university to go online, or we were asking our embassy to talk with the university to make it online, so that we can be free from the classes. At that time, even the flights arranged by Indian governments were very less. We are approx 18,000 students were studying there, and the flights were very less. And those flights which were available, we'll have to go through certain other countries. There were multiple connections in which we have to carry in transit visa, and a few countries. Like being a student, I fear from will they allow me to have visa or not. That's why I was looking for a straight flight, one connection, with maximum with one stop, and those flights were very less or very high price. So
those are the various challenges you faced and then of course by the 24th the Russian invasion began, which again I don't think anyone really expected it to begin that soon, and then the manner in which it began, it wasn't just towards the east, it was the entire country was under attack. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Dinkar, and all the best to you. And with that, we'll slip into a short break and get you more details and developments on the Ukraine crisis. Stay with us.
Well, it's MK Stalin's 69th birthday, his first birthday celebration after he became the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu. We come to you from the DMK headquarters in Chennai, where a few thousand party workers have gathered who have come from all over Tamil Nadu, and it's like a celebration here. The birthday boy is there to come here. It's expected here any moment, and he would meet the party workers here. At the government level, they're launching a skill development program for students, and at the party level across Tamil Nadu, the DMK workers in several areas are involving themselves in welfare activities. With me, a group of DMK workers who have travelled all the way from Tanjavur district, from Pattukota. Thank you very much. How special is this day for you?
Today is the Social Justice Day because our great leader birthday.
And how are you celebrating that?
Yeah, we are celebrating. We came here to meet him. It is a very big celebration for us. Then we brought a book for him.
I see. Gift, is it?
Yeah, yes, it's a gift.
Doctor, you said you also have a book. Yeah. A gift to be given to the Chief Minister.
It's an award-winning book, and it is also a French translation book. So I want to gift the special book to my leader.
What attracts youngsters like you to the DMK?
because we have to separate from the religious atrocity, and we have to give more importance to the female, and we have to give more importance to the social justice. That's why we came for this party. Yeah.
And the entire city is full of posters. Is it okay to do that?
Yes.
Yes?
It's definitely it is a right. Because the people of not only the people of DMK, the total people of Tamil Nadu will also celebrating his birthday, because he is the only leader to save the Tamil people. After Periyar, Anna, Kalaignar, he is the fourth leader of...
The city corporation has said you should not do like that. The city wall should be kept clean.
No, it should be clean, or 1 or 2 days it should be clean. Otherwise...
Sir, comparatively for flex, the poster is safe for the public. So we are pasting the posters. So flex will be create nuisance to the public, whereas poster will be safe one. That's
now several hundred workers are waiting here. What's the plan here?
So we are waiting to meet our CM, Chief Minister.
Meet our CM.
Yeah.
Earlier, when Ms. Jayalalitha was the Chief Minister, you accused the party of psycho-fencing. Is there a similar culture coming up in DMK also now?
Definitely not. Definitely not. We are moving forward to rule the India. So our CM is the next Prime Minister candidate.
Really? MK Stalin is a PM candidate?
Yeah, yes, next PM candidate. That's
DMK workers aspiring quite high for their leader. Otherwise, in terms of activities, a range of welfare activities have been lined up by the party cadre, and any moment now the birthday boy would come here at the headquarters, and then it will be at least a 2-hour-long meeting with party workers. MK Stalin is, in that sense, politically upbeat after 3 successive poll victories that began with the Lok Sabha polls, assembly elections, and then the recent urban local body polls. And just yesterday, Rahul Gandhi had launched the first part of Stalin's autobiography, Gargi.
All right, Sam, and there you had DMK supporters speaking about their great hopes for their leader. Thanks so much for joining us there, Sam.